Hey everybody, I'm Slash, and welcome back to a series where we take a look at some of the cool, interesting, or obscure content that was left in gaming, and see what it would have been like in the actual game, for good or worse. Today, we're going to be playing through the entirety of one of my favorite, and arguably one of the better, Sonic games, Sonic Mania, and there's a lot of stuff to cover. When I was looking at the game and starting to work on this video, there was always going to be something new that would come out like every 12 minutes, so eventually I just stopped trying to keep up. That being said, since the game is fairly new and I actually want to finish this video before the end of the month, so apologies if I miss anything that was recently found. Anyways, why don't we get right into it? So the first bit of interesting stuff actually comes before the game even gets into the first cutscene, and that's the title screen. In the files, there's data for an unused graphic saying Discovery, which most likely would have been the game's original name. This is supported by the title of the title game, which is literally Discovery. My only guess that this was changed because you're not really discovering anything for more than half the game, since like half the levels are remixes of older stages, but I guess you could say that Sega discovered how to make a good Sonic game, and that's having absolutely nothing to do with it. I'm not kidding. There's also some unused background assets and a weird picture of a Mega Drive with a 32X on it, also probably to be used in the title screen. With the title screen out the way, it's time to jump to the actual game. During the cutscene to Angel Island Zone, a remix version of the theme plays, but only for a short time. It turns out in the game's files that there's not a complete version of the song. The one in the game is cut off by exactly 16 seconds. It sucks. T-Loops, the game's composer, confirmed that there's no full version of the song or even plans to make one, which is a shame because this mixes are godlike. But with the song's end and the Phantom Ruby stolen, Green Hill Zone is loaded, and from here there's actually a lot of stuff that was left out. So first, ironically, is an unused enemy splats. These badniks appear later in Press Garden, but the version of them that can be found in the Green Hill Zone debug are never actually used in the game. The fact that the unused enemy from the original Green Hill Zone still went unused even over 20 years later is still hilarious to me for some reason, but I guess it is nice that they brought him back in one form or another. Another thing that went unused in the original were these stationary versions of Robotnik's Wrecking Ball that can be seen in some early beta footage. I'm unsure whether or not these are actually used, but I couldn't find more of them loaded anywhere into Sonic's version of the stage. Either way, when you spawn more than a few of them, they bug out and flip through walls. This can lead to some interesting results, but I think one of the better ones is just infinitely killing Tails. Another weird thing about this stage is that it was one of the demo stages originally shown off for the game, and the demo version is actually still left in, but I couldn't really find anything different in it. I think to my knowledge one or two platforms are different, but that's kind of it. Also, something weird in Act 2 is this random platform that just leads to nowhere. It's just kind of there. This is a stretch, but one theory I have about this is that Act 2 was originally supposed to have a larger upper path involving a platforming section using these, but obviously nothing like this exists in the final version. So, Chemical Plant Zone is next, and while there's no weird unused stage assets, there is a cool unused but fully programmed badnik in the level. I actually discovered this guy by accident on stream, and just how it works is even stranger. No matter where you place them when using debug mode, they'll automatically snap to any surface of water in the stage. This is weird because the said water that they snap onto actually damages you in the final version, so this wouldn't really make much sense from a level design standpoint. And what's even weirder about these guys is that they're completely unused in Act 2, probably because of the bounty version of the water. Wait, what do you even call that? Jello? Either way, its existence doesn't make much sense, but seeing how it's completely coded, touched up, and has a function, this badnik was probably removed pretty close to the release date. In retrospect, it would have been pretty annoying to just out of nowhere get spiked by one of these dudes, but I still think without the water mechanic they would have been pretty cool enemies. But that's not it for Chemical Plant Zone. In the beginning of the level, a cutscene plays where the, Jello drops on Sonic's head. For this, he has a completely unique animation, but Tails just kind of floats. Well, it turns out that Tails also has an animation for this, and I gotta say, it's friggin' adorable. I have no idea why they would leave this out, so maybe they just forgot to add it in. Either way, with Tails' animation and the unused Spiny Boy out the way, it's time to get lit AF fam. That actually physically hurt for me to say. Studiopolis Zone has probably the most unused assets because it was the first stage of Mania that was made for Christian Whitehead's pitch. So starting off, there's actually an unused boss in Act 2 called the Jankin Capsule that looked like and would have functioned like the capsule from Flying Battery Zone in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, except its eyes looked like different rock paper scissors symbols. I can only guess that the boss's arms would have had something to do with the rock paper scissors mechanic, and this was probably removed because Flying Battery Zone is literally the next stage after, but keep in mind that this is all speculation and the boss could have been completely different. Next is an unused gimmick in the stage called a love tester in the data. I can't think of a way this would have worked, but there is a monitor with various different icons based on who you're playing as. One that's neutral, one for winning, and one for losing. While Knuckles and Tails' winning expressions look fine, Sonic doesn't look all that pleased. Probably because,
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
While that's all for Act 2, as well as Amy's Hopes and Dreams, Act 1 is even stranger. So it turns out, in addition to Green Hill Zone Act 1, Studiopolis Zone was also a playable demo stage, except it's way more broken. To start off, there's no music. At all. The sound still works fine, and even things like the 1-Up jingle play, but there's just no theme. This might be because of a few things. One, there could have been a call for a placeholder song to use during testing, or to show in the original pitch that just doesn't exist anymore. Or two, the song could have intentionally been removed in preparation for recording a trailer or showcase video, which would have had the stage and sound effects still, just without the background music, for easier post-editing of the clips. Either way, it makes creating memes like these way easier. While everything in the stage looks fine, it's not. It really isn't. For starters, the top half is completely unclearable because the loop is missing a layer change, and upon completing the stage, the game crashes. Okay, understandable. But if you've noticed something before the crash, there's no mini-boss at all. The cop heavy is completely gone, no fight or anything. And where the transition will be, there's just a signpost. This probably means that they were either waiting to reveal them to build hype, or they just weren't finished yet. With that in mind, Studiopolis Zone is the ideal test stage that Christian Whitehead's team could present, and even if its original build is still extremely buggy, it still lets us see some of the stuff that could have been in the final version. Flying Battery Zone doesn't really have any unused assets other than these few sprites that were left over, but other than that, the stage is pretty normal. What's not normal, however, is Press Garden Zone, my favorite zone as well as the game's second unique zone, which, as you can imagine, has a whole load of unused concepts, hidden areas, and cancelled designs. So first, and probably least important, is an area right below the first stage, which has blocks in the background spelling hello in reverse. This doesn't really have any meaning, in fact it was probably just put there as an Easter egg, but nonetheless, it's still kinda cool. Okay, so now into the actual unused stuff. In the game's files, there are data paths or sprites that show different colored vats of ink, as well as two kinds of printing presses. What's interesting is that these vats have a different layer for the actual ink inside, and there's even a splash and drop sprite to go with it. One theory around this that I have is that the printing press would have went into the vat and shot out ink depending on the type of press, and it's more than likely that each of the different colors would give off a different effect, maybe speed for blue, high jumps for red, and flight for yellow. Or they could just be based off of what character you use. After all, they are kind of the three main colors. Some other assets are an unused stack of newspapers, a glass pane, and a sideways rolling rack of newspapers, which probably would have been for aesthetic effect. And the rack might have boosted or something, I don't know. I don't really know why these were removed, but it might have just been too many gimmicks for one level, which would have made the design a little bit cluttered. But that's not all for Press Garden, as the game's files reveal a little bit more about the zone in early development. It turns out that almost every reference to the zone calls it Pulp Solstice Zone, which is probably the worst name I've ever heard for a Sonic stage. Pulp Solstice makes sense, but I'm so glad they changed it. Press Garden is way more clever, even though it makes you wonder if the design was intended to be different at all during development. Our next stage is probably one of the most hyped for this game, and that's Stardust Speedway. Sadly, there's not really much to cover about this stage, but still, the little stuff there is pretty cool. In Act 1, after defeating the mini-boss, a cutscene plays where the time travel sequence happens to take you to Act 2. Well, I actually went out of bounds, and without triggering the cutscene, I found that 1, the machine has a destroyed sprite, but more importantly 2, the future signpost is fully functional with that classic sound effect, and what's even stranger is that the particles for the time travel will actually appear behind Sonic when he reaches the speed from the original Sonic CD. And yes, these particles will also stay with you for the entire stage if you choose to go back. But taking the seizure-inducing time travel sequence into Act 2 and going into the Metal Sonic boss fight, but pulling a boundary break with the signpost, we can see that the tower in the background is actually either one-sided or doesn't render past the back. So what we're left with is this buggy version of Eggman's tower. I guess you could say I saw right through his plans. Okay, I'll stop. Probably. Finally, the last cool detail from Stardust Speedway is the wall of spikes that follows through the last section of the Metal Sonic race. Well, when you thought you were getting ahead of the wall by spamming the drop dash, you weren't. It turns out that the wall actually teleports a certain distance behind you once it's too far away. We can see that this is the case right here when the wall slightly passes me in debug mode, meaning it would technically be behind me, relatively speaking. So it snaps back to its original distance, meaning that there is literally no way to get ahead of the wall. Either way, the fight is pretty easy, so I don't think this one was too much of a cop-out anyway. Moving forward, I'll group the next few stages together because alone, their content is pretty scarce. Hydra City Zone doesn't really have any unused content, but what it does have is a pretty cool Easter egg. By attaching to one of the hooks found earlier in the level and entering the Sonic 3 and Knuckles level select code, left, 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 right, 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 up, up, up. Every time you use one of these boosters in place of the normal sound effect, this will play instead. Video game donkey, that is beautiful. Mirage Saloon's mini-boss is technically an enemy and can be spawned with normal items in debug mode, but one more interesting thing that can be found in debug mode, originally discovered by Tetrabit Gaming, is in the upper right corner of the stage where you can find Fang, Bark, and Bean floating on these armadillo badniks. I actually did a bit of investigating, and it looks like these guys are just flat sprites that can't be interacted with, which means that this was probably another Easter egg the team put in to be found by curious players like you and I. Or they were just being stored for the cutscene where one of them shoots down your plane. In Lava Reef Zone, there's an unused pool of lava to the left of the start, which could have been used as a transition from Oil Ocean Zone, which, speaking of, has a few recolored unused sprites as shown here. And finally, for Titanic Monarch Zone, there's this really cool model of the mech in the background that went unused, probably for stylistic reasons. Finally, ending off with the special stages, there's a couple of unused layouts for the Blue Spheres minigame, probably as tests or something. And yes, one of these is also literally every Sonic player's best dream or worst nightmare. And that's a blue sphere stage filled with literally nothing but blue spheres, with an edge of red spheres. But the really cool stuff can be found when looking at the Mania mode special stages. In the data, there exists an unused text block saying Hyper and Time to Escape. The hypertext could be an indication that Hypersonic was originally planned to make an appearance, maybe after getting every medal in the Sonic 3 special stages. The second text, Time to Escape, is in the style of the minigame text and could have been for running away from the UFO after getting the emerald, which would have been cool. Maybe you would have had to play the entire stage in reverse, which might be a reason as to why it was removed, because some stages do use linear boost pads and all. But I can only imagine the chase scene and just how scary it would be if you couldn't just B-hop to like 3 times your normal speed, completely breaking the stage. And that's it for Lost Content in Sonic Mania. That's all for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to drop a like down below, as it really helps the channel grow. I think this new format for hidden blocks going from start to finish in the game is probably gonna stay, but if you've got any thoughts or suggestions as to the direction I'm taking this series, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. And as always, don't forget to smash that squishy red subscribe button for more. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll be back in a flash.